Welcome back, guys. A lot of schools take their students on school trips. They can be fun, they can be boring, they can be memorable, but what is the scariest school trip that you've ever heard about? I think it might be one of these. I'm Danny Burke, and this is the top 10 scary school trip stories. Starting off at number 10, we have a story from a small Kansas town in 1957. A teacher there decided to get senior students to take the new students on a pre-Halloween trip through a haunted house. Now the principal thought he would play a bit of a prank and let the students find him hanging in the dark with a rope tied under his arms, and they would think he's hanging by the neck. They covered the house with creepy decorations for the students' arrival. They were pretty creeped out by all of the rooms, especially the room with the scary man hanging from the ceiling and groaning. As the last students left, the teacher went to get a picture of the principal. She called out his name. There was no answer. It was then that she realized he had tripped on the floor decorations. The rope had slipped from his arms up to his neck, and he had actually died from strangulation. Next up at number 9, we have the story of Horatio Chappell, a 17-year-old student who went on a school trip to Norway in 2011. The area was known for bears, but the leaders of the trip were pretty experienced. One morning at 7:30 a.m. the group was still asleep. The warning system they set up around their camp failed to detect any intruder. Suddenly Horatio's tent was ripped open, and there stood a huge polar bear. He barely had any time to move before the bear dragged him out across the snow, smashing his head against a rock. As the rest of the camp woke up, they left their tents just in time to see the bear slam again into Horatio. They did eventually kill the bear, but it was too late for him. Coming out at number 8 now, we have a story from the YouTube channel Mr. Nightmare. One of his subscribers said that in his first year of high school, he went on a school trip to an activity resort. He went with his friend Landon, and on the first day, they did go-karting, rock climbing, and all that stuff before going to bed that night. Their ground floor room had a sliding door with a view to the lake. At 10 p.m, when it was dark, they went to bed and left the blinds on the sliding door open. He fell asleep, but was woken an hour later when Landon screamed. At the window was a tall, skinny old woman with long grey hair just staring through the window. She walked away, leaving them in shock. At the end of the next day, they fell asleep again, but he woke up to silence and just a strange feeling looming over him. He looked over to Landon to see if he was awake, but he couldn't see him. There was just black. He realized something was blocking his vision of the other bed. Not something, someone. He looked up, and there was the old woman standing over him. She quickly left, and they did too the very next morning. At number 7 now, this story starts with a New York high school who had recently suffered the loss of a 17-year-old student who had died in a car crash. Now the school's forensic science club went on a trip not long after to a morgue to study how they preserve organs. One of the students looked at the name tag on a jar that had a human brain in it, and to their horror they realized it was their classmate's brain who had recently died. His parents thought they had buried him with all of his organs, but the morgue had actually kept his brain for further study without even telling them. They were sued for emotionally traumatizing the students who saw the brain. Alright, coming in at number 6 now, we have a story from backpackverse.com from a woman who says that when she was a kid, she went on a nature walk school trip. They were split into groups of 10 for the walk as the teachers talked about nature and the history of the area they were in. She hung back, and then suddenly Victorian looking school children burst out of the trees laughing, and they had a white glow all around them. One of them, a girl, said, "Hello, would you like to play?" But she was paralyzed with fear. She couldn't answer. The girl took her by the hand and into the woods. They got to a cave which was full of these ghostly children. She said they brought her there to be initiated into their family. It was then that she decided to run away, and they screamed, "Get her!" She didn't stop running until she reached her teacher, and although she could still see the children in the trees, she knew she was safe. Alright, next up at number 5 now, we have a story that will definitely scare any parents watching. In 2011, students at Lowell Elementary School in Seattle went on a school trip that needed parents to help chaperone the kids alongside the teachers. Now, during the trip, one of the parents recognized another chaperone, and then suddenly it dawned on her. He was on Washington's Most Wanted. He had been all over the TV after being arrested more than 20 times as a high violent offender, and he was wanted by police. He was also the parent of one of the girls on that trip. He went on the run again. The school ended up going into lockdown, but he did eventually surrender, much to the relief of the other parents. Moving on to number 4. In 1986, Oregon Episcopal School went on a wilderness experience trip to climb Mount Hood. As the group climbed the mountain, the weather started to get really bad. They turned around but were caught in a severe snowstorm and decided their only option to survive was to dig out a cave in the snow for shelter until the storm passed. They had just one shovel, the rest of them used their hands. It took them 2 hours to dig the shelter and it was still too small for them. They took it in turns to be in the shelter. 2 of them then went down the mountain to go and get help, but when help finally arrived, they found 3 of the students frozen in the snow halfway down the mountain. They could not revive them. They then got to the shelter and found only 2 of them alive. One of them ended up making a full recovery, but the other had to have both their legs amputated due to frostbite. At number 3 now, we have another story from Mr. Nightmare about a kid who took a field trip to a rural zoo. After looking at the animals outside for a while, they entered a large building that contained animal taxidermies, all frozen in position. He snuck off to the bathroom without telling his teacher. When he came back out, he walked along the dimly lit halls, picturing the animals moving in life, before seeing a man hidden behind a stack of chairs at the very back. The man came out and asked, "Where is the group?" The boy said, "I don't know." The man then grabbed his hand and led him to an exit door and into the woods outside. The boy pulled back and the man pulled harder. Finally, a teacher saw them and screamed. The man let go and ran into the woods. The teachers saved the boy. The trip was then obviously cancelled, but as they left on the bus, he said he looked back out into the woods and saw the man crouching and smiling behind a tree. Coming in at number 2 now. In 2005, Joseph Lister went with his school to visit some caves in Yorkshire, England. As they explored the caves underground, the teacher decided to bring the group back to the surface because of rising water levels. When they got to the surface, the teacher turned around to find that Joseph was gone. The water kept rising and rising. The teacher called for help and 2 rescue teams came. They found Joseph 250 meters into the flooded cave. He was rushed to hospital but died 5 hours later with his parents by his side. And finally at number 1 now. In 1976, 26 children aged 5 to 14 were on their way back from a swimming pool field trip in California when the driver stopped to see if a car that had broken down needed any help. Suddenly, 3 masked men stormed onto the bus with guns. They drove the children and the bus driver around for 11 hours before eventually stopping at a quarry. They then loaded them into a buried van with a tiny bit of food, some water and some mattresses to sleep on. The kidnappers then went off to go and make their ransom demands, but the phone lines were too full from all the media calls and the families looking for their children. In that time, the bus driver managed to stack up the mattresses, allowing them to climb up to the top of the quarry and escape. Amazingly, all of them were fine and lived to tell this terrifying tale. Alright guys, like I always say in every scary video I do, things like this are scary because they are so rare. So, if you're watching this and you are at school, don't be scared of school trips, but do be careful. Yeah? Good. I'm Danny Burke. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next video.